So I think we'll make a start. Thanks everybody for joining and logging on. Good morning, and a really warm welcome to everyone from my colleagues and I at Hargreaves Lansdown. A really big thank you for joining us today. We have over 140 people registered, and I can see that most people have logged on. So let's get cracking. So the aim today is to answer some of the questions we've received about the impact of coronavirus on your company pension, and of course the effect of lockdown on your employees' well-being. We've had a great response to our request for questions, and that perhaps is reflecting the level of anxiety out there amongst employees. And we'll be putting those questions to our panel of experts. Now, this is a different format for us, and I hope the technology is working okay for you. We usually host breakfast seminars at the Ritz, but instead many of you will be working from home, perhaps juggling home life and work. Now, personally, I'm hoping that none of my children or various pets appear in the background, but if anything doesn't quite go to plan, do bear with us. You may be lucky enough to have a home office, but wherever you are, in your kitchen, bedroom, attic, shed, or wherever, I hope you're settled down with a cuppa and ready to go. Now, just in case you're not familiar with Zoom, and I'm sure you've all had a lot of practice recently, there is a Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. Please do use that to ask any questions as we go, and we'll try to get through as many as we can at the end. So some introductions. I'm Richard Turner. I'm part of the team at HL Workplace, and I work with employers to provide modern new pension plans, workplace savings, that includes ISAs nowadays, and financial wellbeing programs for employees. My co-host is Darren. You can't actually see him, he's a bit shy, but he is working hard behind the scenes to make sure everything runs smoothly. And our first panelist today is Emma Wall. She is Hargreaves Lansdown's Head of Investment Analysis. Delighted you can be with us today. Hi, Emma.
Hi, Richard. Thank you for having me.
No problem. We also have Alistair Stewart-Hunt. He is Client Relationship Manager, working with employers to raise employee engagement. Morning, Alistair.
Good morning, Richard.
Morning. Now, I know, Alistair, your internet connection can sometimes be a bit rural, so if you freeze, we'll just carry on without you. Don't take it personally. We also welcome Katie Hooper, Head of Workplace Retirement Services. Hi there, Katie. Either Katie's dropped off or she's just frozen a bit. We'll come back to Katie. We also have Paul Thatcher. Now, Paul is Head of HR Business Partnering at Hargreaves Lansdown. Hi there, Paul.
Good morning.
Hi. Now, Paul is one of the very few Hargreaves Lansdown employees still in the office. So before we get started, I'd like to ask if you can take part in a quick poll. And you should see this appearing on your screen now. And the question is, what impact has coronavirus had on your employees' overall financial well-being? So if it's zero impact and you're not getting any money-related questions for employees, click 1. Minimal impact. A few employees have asked about the effects of CV-19, click 2. If it's a reasonable impact and you've had lots of questions about pensions and benefits since the start of lockdown, click 3. And if it's a significant impact and employees are really worried about the effect of CV-19 on their finances, then click 4. So, see those coming in. Okay, I think everybody has a few more need to vote, if you don't mind clicking. Great. Okay. So thank you for doing that. And it's interesting to see that actually 46% have had a minimal impact. A few employees have asked about the effects of CV-19. 29% there's a reasonable impact, and 10% significant impact. So thanks for that. Very interesting results there. Okay. So let's get back to the questions, and we get straight on to Straight on to some questions. And to start with, we're going to focus on the markets and the economy. So Emma, that's very much your area. And this might seem a bit obvious because it's all over the news, but why has coronavirus impacted the economy?
So to understand the real impact of coronavirus on the economy, you've got to think about what makes up the economy. So the economy is broadly split into three sectors which drive growth. So the first is agriculture. This is probably the area that's seen the least impact because for the most part, demand is still there. You know, I don't know if any of you on the call have been guilty of hoarding baked beans or bread or flour, but for certain agricultural items, demand hasn't waned. For others, however, agriculture also supplies industry. There has been reduced demand, which brings me on to the second sector of the economy, which makes up the economy, is industry. That's the production of goods for sale or export. This has been impacted, particularly because of that word export. Not only are fewer people moving around, but fewer stuff is moving around the world as well, as we've kind of locked down and reduced trade. So that's impacted industry. And the third part of the economy, which has seen the biggest impact, is the services sector. This is the sector which covers tourism, entertainment, retail. And as we know, we're just not doing those things. We're not out on the high street buying clothes. We're not traveling. We're not in restaurants. We're not in pubs. And so that has seen significant reduction in demand. And so therefore has gone on to impact the economy.
And we've seen this all over the news, and we've also seen a lot of headlines about share prices going up and down, mostly down. Why has coronavirus impacted the stock market?
Well, there are two elements to this answer as well. First is the fundamentals, and that is basically the truth of the impact. We're spending less money, we're moving about less, we are demanding less, we need less. And therefore, companies which supply the things that previously we needed, we wanted, we were buying, will see less money coming in. That's called fundamentals. The fundamentals have been affected. And then there's this extra layer on top, which we call animal spirits. And that is sentiment, that's fear, that's greed. And that also drives the stock market in any time, but in particular in times such as these, where we see these extreme volatility in these dips we saw in March. So some of that dip was because the fundamentals of the companies in the stock market truly were affected. And some of that dip was sentiment, the fear and the uncertainty about what's going on. How long will it last? How long will these companies be impacted? And as the uncertainty starts to wane and that fear is removed, you do see the stock market come up, even though the fundamentals haven't really changed.
Great, and I'm sure we all want to see some light at the end of the tunnel. What are the experts actually predicting is going to happen next? I'm reading things like a V-shaped recovery and an L-shaped recovery. I've no idea what that means, so maybe you could perhaps ask us, perhaps explain what that all means.
So it's a nod to the shape rather than any acronym. So a V-shaped recovery is very much like a V. You have a sharp economic downturn, and then at the inflection point, which some are saying is going to be the lifting of restrictions, you also have this sharp recovery, which means that actually once restrictions are lifted, we can return to normal and the economy will function just as well as it functioned before. Then there's the L-shaped recovery. This one's a bit confusing because it doesn't quite work. You sort of have to tilt the L slightly, and that's a sharp downturn. That's what we're experiencing at the moment, and the Chancellor has admitted that's what's going on. But then you sort of move this little bit of the L out a bit, and it's a much slower recovery to get back to that level that we were at before. And these are the two scenarios that people are debating at the moment. Is it enough to just lift restrictions and we will bounce back to where we were, or is there damage that has been done to the economy that will last longer and it will take us much longer to recover from?
Yeah. And looking further afield, Emma, how does what happens in other countries actually impact on our workplace pension schemes here?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question because I think, understandably, we can be quite consumed by what's going on in the UK from a health point of view. But from a financial point of view, really, you've got to think globally because we are so interconnected. If you think about the device that you're watching this on, either your laptop, your computer, or maybe even your mobile, there are thousands of component parts that go into that one product. And those thousands of component parts were all produced probably all over the world. So in order for production for that one item, and millions like it, we need trade to return, we need people to return to work. So really, although the UK economy could bounce back, the companies here in the UK, the companies in your pension, are global. And so we need a global recovery before really things can start to get back onto an even footing.
Okay, and a final question for you, Emma, and this is something that we get asked a lot by clients. Before coronavirus, the topic at the top of many investors' minds was investing for good, sometimes called ESG investing. So how have the last few months impacted on this particular theme?
A subject very close to my heart, and actually it's been really heartening to see how ESG investing has been sustained through this downturn. So we take a look back to 2008, 2009, the last economic crisis we had of this magnitude. Ethical investing, as it was more known as then, was more in its infancy, and the global financial crisis completely wiped it from the agenda, and it took a long time, arguably until reasonably recently, to get back into conversation with both professional and everyday investors. This time around, ESG has actually been really integrated into what's going on. If you have a look at some of the investments that have performed best through the difficult times of the last 3 months, ESG investments have actually been some of the best, partly lack of exposure to oil, which has done badly as the oil price came down, but also because if you think about the type of company that you want to invest in right now, it's companies that look after their employees, they look after the world, they think long-term and sustainably, and those are ESG companies, and those are the ones that weather difficult times such as these, arguably the best.
Yeah, I think we're going to see a very different investment world when we come out of all of this. Emma, many thanks indeed. It's a really fascinating insight into how markets and economy, how they're reacting to the impacts of CV-19. May come back to you with some more questions later on.
Please do.
Next, moving on to Alistair. If you're there, Alistair.
I am indeed, Richard.
Good, good. Now, you work with employers running pension schemes, so you must be hearing what issues HR people are having to deal with every day. So the first question for you, and this reflects the fact that many companies are now doing less or in fact no business since lockdown. In order for companies to try and save some money, can employers temporarily stop making employer pension contributions?
Well, the short answer to that, Richard, is no, they can't. So contractual obligations aside, it's the automatic enrolment legislation which doesn't actually allow an employer to suspend the employer contributions. They can't do anything which is going to stop a member being an active member of a qualifying scheme. So no, you cannot suspend your employer contributions completely.
Okay, so pretty clear on that one. But if they wanted to reduce contributions, is that something that they could do instead?
Yeah, and that's a pretty pertinent question now. Obviously, lots of employers have been pretty hard hit by the pandemic, so looking for ways to reduce costs. If your scheme is already at the statutory minimum, so you're paying just the minimum you need to under the legislation, then unfortunately there's no wiggle room to reduce your contributions any further. But actually, if you're paying in excess of the minimum, then potentially you can reduce your employer contributions. So it is possible. However, you need to be aware that if you've got more than 50 staff, that is what's called a listed change and would require some normal consultation requirements. We're saying that the pension regulator there's been some easement around the rules. So if you don't consult for 60 days, they won't take regulatory action. But there are some really specific conditions that apply there. So you need to check the pension regulator's website.
Okay, so thinking about employees and how their income's been affected, can members stop paying contributions if they are actually in financial difficulty themselves?
Okay, so yes, they can. So that will be subject to the scheme rules. So some schemes are quite flexible and some aren't and allow just maybe once a year changes. So if you're going to supersede your own rules and allow that flexibility, make sure you open that flexibility to everyone, so you don't open yourself up to any sort of discrimination. I think it's really important that employees understand that if they're going to reduce their contributions or even stop, then they're going to lose out on those valuable employer contributions as well. So it might seem like an easy way to say, but perhaps they should consider some other alternatives. So personally, I'm always amazed at how many paid for subscriptions I seem to sign up for, be it Amazon and Spotify and Audible and Netflix and all those sort of things. And some of those things might be the things which keeping you sane in this slightly crazy time, but it might just be worth having a think. Actually, are those things more important than my long-term income in retirement? So the message really should be, keep it brief. You don't want to build up a big savings gap, and there is a risk here that people actually will actually forget to start their contributions again. And build up an even bigger savings gap. So perhaps, again, responsible employers could think about some kind of communication at the end of this to encourage people to restart if they have stopped. There's just a couple of final points on this. The first is around the inducement rules. So an employer can't do anything to induce an employee out of the scheme so that the employer will save money. So just be really careful around your wording if you're going to do that. The second thing is around if you've got re-enrollment duties, you'll have to consider how you're going to treat those people who have come out of the scheme. And then the final thing is around salary sacrifice. So if you offer salary sacrifice as the method for making contributions to the scheme, just be aware that if a member does reduce their contributions or stop, you as the employer can't claim that additional salary, i.e. the cancelled salary sacrifice, through the coronavirus job retention scheme or the furlough scheme, because it's the salary as at the 28th of February, which is going to act as your reference point for what the salary is. Now, I would say that the interrelationship between the coronavirus job retention scheme or furlough and salary sacrifice is really, really complex. So if you've got any questions or you're concerned, do seek professional advice or speak to your specialist, tax specialists or employment lawyers about that, because you don't want to invalidate any claim of through that furlough scheme.
Great. So it sounds to me as if if you can possibly keep things going, carry on as normal, it might save some problems further down the line, or getting into quite complex situations. So I know this is something that you talk to your employers about a lot, and it's around engagement. So I had a question. I think we all know it's a challenge getting employees engaged with pensions at the best of times. But have you had any hints or tips, or can employers maintain engagement during COVID-19?
Yeah, it's pretty interesting times, and I think employers who've got some good pre-existing levels of engagement and have provided financial education are going to be in a lot better position than those who haven't, really, because the purpose of engagement is to try and educate and ensure good decision making. And I think at these extraordinary times there is a risk of making some poor decisions. There's all sorts of stock market volatility. There's risk, fears of recession, and people are seeing the values of their pension funds going down, and that is actually making them susceptible to making some poor choices. Now, the truth is actually regular pension investors have got nothing to fear. History tells us that markets will return, and in fact, during this period when prices are down, your regular contributions are buying you cheaper units, which is good. But this is not well understood. So that's one thing that employers could think about educating their employees around. The other thing is that for those who are near retirement, I appreciate that Katie's going to talk about this a little bit more, but for those who are near retirement, the situation is very, very different. And the decisions that they are going to make potentially are going to have profound and permanent consequences. So I think for them, access to really good, clear information and guidance and even financial advice is going to be really, really key. So I think now is not the time for employers to stay silent. And so I would encourage employers to get some help, seek advice from their advisors or providers. There's a host of information and comms that you can use. So speak to them about getting access to those communications. What's interesting actually is the after effects of the financial crisis in 2008 was that there was actually an increase in the general level of financial capability across the UK. And so, because people were shocked by that and actually took more personal responsibility. And I think this is a very similar sort of time we're living in. And so employers should use that opportunity to engage with their employees. Now, we've significantly increased the amount of communications that we are making available to our clients. And it's up to them whether they choose to use those communications or not, but most are. And we've written those communications off the back of feedback and questions and queries that our members are having. So I think now is actually a good opportunity to engage with your members.
Okay, and I can see we've got a question on re-auto enrolment. I'm going to save that until later on, so be prepared for that one later on, Alistair. So something else that has been in the press recently is the increase in the number of financial scams out there. And a question that we had from a concerned employer was, how can they make employees aware of scams and actually help to protect them?
Okay, yeah, this is another really important point. And actually, scams are up about 400% since the outbreak started. And the average cost to a victim is over £80,000, which is a significant amount of money. And again, it's the impact of markets is what people are hearing in the news. It's in some cases, actually, it's the instability of the sponsoring employer, which is making people more vulnerable to this. And scammers are targeting people into so-called safe havens or guaranteed returns. And I think it would be really prudent of employers to think about raising awareness and making sure that employees are aware of the main sort of signs of a scam. And there's some really good communications and tips on the pension regulator's website. But the kind of the 5 key signs are firstly, unsolicited contact. So you get contact out of the blue with some kind of offer. Typically, those offers will be, high or guaranteed returns for low risk, free pension reviews. There's typically always the pressure to act quickly. So if there's any kind of pressure, that's normally a sign. And typically any kind of early access to a pension before the age of 55. So those are the main 5 sort of key signs of a scam. So again, it would be wise for employers to think about actually reminding people during this time when they are potentially a little bit more susceptible to scams.
Okay, good advice. And Alistair, final question for you, which is actually split into 2. So the first part of it is, will the government allow employees to access their pension funds before age 55 if this can help save people's homes and such like?
Okay, so, well, there hasn't been a lot of talk of changing the retirement age to before 55 at a policy-making level. I think part of that is the government is probably quite worried about the longer term impact on retirement incomes if they do allow people to do that. Obviously, if you can access your pension early, then by the time when you really need it, there's going to be far less and not enough time to make up that gap. So I think they're worried about that. The other thing is, I think perhaps certainly the early data suggests that people aren't quite as sort of financially stressed, who haven't got to sort of critical levels yet. So the early data suggests that that people are making fairly good decisions. So things like the saving ratio, that's the proportion of household income which is diverted to savings rather than being spent. That's up, which is good. Credit card use has pretty much fallen off a cliff. And pension contributions at the moment have stayed pretty stable. So people aren't reducing or stopping their contributions. So at the moment, household finances appear to be quite resilient, but given that we're still early days and there could be a long way to go, that may change and that things may change at a policy making level, but certainly no talk of that at the moment.
Okay, and there's a second part to that question. If employees do access their pensions early to cover a period of hardship, as we were discussing, but then later find new employment, will the government remove the restriction on pension contributions above 4,000 a year?
Okay, so this is all about accessing your pensions from the age of 55, so accessing them flexibly. And if you do so, you're then hit by what's called the money purchase annual allowance, whereby the maximum contribution you can put in is only £4,000 per year. So on this point, so there has actually been quite a lot of talk within the industry around this point. The removal of the money purchase annual allowance would potentially benefit so many people and actually cost the Treasury so much. I think they're going to be very reticent about removing that restriction. And bearing in mind, this is at a time when the cost of the furlough scheme is approaching the cost of the annual NHS budget. So there's not a lot of money sort of swishing around in the Treasury. What is interesting, though, is that the government have removed the lifetime ISA penalty. So if you access your lifetime ISA early, pre-60, there's no longer that penalty in place. And so the government is clearly aware that the impact of COVID-19 on finances, and they are adjusting policy accordingly, but I think that's potentially a pretty small change. So I think they are aware of it, but I think it's going to be unlikely that they're going to shift the money purchase annual or access to that.
Okay, Alison, many thanks indeed. Maybe coming back to you later on with a couple of questions that have come in. In the meantime, we're going to move on to our next poll, and this should be launching on the screen. Hold on. Poll number 2. So this is about engagement, and we were talking about engagement earlier on. So how engaged do you think your employees are with your company pension? So is it very low? People have other priorities? Are some employees engaged, mainly the high earners? Are most of your employees, most of understand and appreciate the company pension? Or are the vast majority fully engaged and contribute meaningful amounts? So you've got the votes coming in. So half of you have voted so far. Interesting. So just seeing those votes coming in. If anybody hasn't voted and want to, if you could just click your answer for me, that would be great. Okay, so I'm going to end the polling now and share the results with you guys. So interesting. So the highest is some employees, mainly the high earners, are engaged. And the next is most of our employees understand and appreciate the company pension. Only 10% are fully engaged, and you've actually got nearly a quarter who are very low, and employees have other priorities. Interesting stuff there. So I'm just going to finish that. And so moving on to Katie. So Katie, are you there okay? You're on mute at the moment, so you just want to take some.
Yeah.
Brilliant, okay. So Katie works with employers to help employees closer to retirement make some really important decisions about how to draw money out of their pensions. So first of all, Katie, have many people delayed their retirement due to COVID-19?
Yes, well, so unfortunately, we've seen actually quite a lot of people have to delay their retirement. This is probably because the fund value has unfortunately dropped following the market volatility. And at the moment, it's just really uncertain what the future holds. So as such, we've seen quite a lot of people delay taking their benefits.
Okay, and in the old days, of course, you could only buy an annuity with your pension. That's a guaranteed income for life. Today, there's lots of other options. So have annuity rates been impacted by COVID-19?
Yeah, unfortunately, again, it's another yes. So they've fallen about 4% since COVID-19 kicked off here in the UK. However, there is a slight positive that they are up 7% since the aftermath of the Brexit referendum. So it's not all bad news, but they're not looking great at the moment.
Okay, and looking at things overall at retirement, what does coronavirus mean for retirement generally?
Well, I guess for most people who are looking to retire or who've got it planned for the next year or so, things have become pretty unsettled because of the pandemic. The value of the pension might have dropped, and I guess people are probably wondering now whether it's the right time or not to retire. I guess even some people who didn't even have any plans to retire might be thinking about dipping into their pension to cover short-term expenses from the cash. So I guess it's likely that that pension and retirement plans are going to be delayed because of what's going on at the moment. If someone has enough savings to support themselves and their job hasn't been affected by the pandemic, they might even want to consider working even longer and delaying their plans altogether. So if you look at the sort of recent stock market activity that Emma was talking about, it's going to really likely to have affected their retirement plan. So it's probably not the best time for people to start taking money out. And I guess also on the positive, if you hold off for now until the dust has settled, it could mean that the markets have time to recover, giving you the chance to actually make the most of your pension and increase that value overall. So probably people are going to look to sort of delay things. So that's the first thing. I'd also say everyone's always told to sort of have a rainy day saving pot to ensure you've got a cash buffer in case of emergency. So unfortunately, this is the time actually when this rainy day cash should be used to cover the support in the short term. So ideally, if people can use that short-term savings first, that would be the ideal thing. So when you take an income from your pension, that's normally going to be taxable as well. So by taking any money out of your pension, you're going to pay tax. So if you can avoid that and use this cash buffer you've got, you're going to avoid paying tax unnecessarily. However, as Alistair was talking about just now, if you do need to take an income from your pension, you're going to trigger the money purchase annual allowance. So it will mean that the amount that can be paid into your pension going forward will be reduced to £4,000 a year. And this limit also includes the contributions not only you make, but your employer makes, and also the tax relief that you get from the government. So it's a really important decision to actually think about whether you do really need to dip into your pension now, because it might not seem like a problem now, but obviously it could affect you in the future if you want to rebuild your pension to a reasonable sized pension pot. So that's something that's really important to consider. And also, if you do decide to take the income, do think about the tax implications and how your pension fund might be taxed in that instance.
Okay.
I'd also say before accessing pensions and stuff, now is even more so important to actually get some guidance or advice. So everyone from age 50 with a money purchase pension scheme has the right to take a guidance session from Pensions Wise. They offer a free impartial government service and the different ways that you can take your pension. So they'll also cover how each option is taxed. So that's a really valuable service that they can offer. And even if you do think you've got your plans worked out in your head, it's really useful to get a second opinion there. So broadly speaking, you'll have three main options. You've got the secure income, the annuity, that gives you the amount of 25% tax-free cash at the start. You can also take income drawdown, so where you get the tax-free cash at the start and you can take a regular income. That fund will still be invested in the stock market. We've actually seen more people shift away from the attractiveness of drawdown over the last couple of months and think, actually, I do need some secure income. So actually some income that's going to cover my essential outgoings each month to ensure that, you know, in times like this, you can cover your bills and stuff. And the final option is the pension fund lump sum withdrawal, so UF+, as it's also known. So you get a bit of income and a bit of tax-free cash with every withdrawal you take. And the final thing I'd probably say on that is now the right time to take financial advice. So it's really important to consider taking advice anyway when it matters, not only retirement, but with the uncertainty of things going on at the moment, it might have caused people's confidence to dip. So we'd expect more people to start taking financial advice to help them with their retirement plans during this current situation.
Okay, so if you can sit tight and don't access your pension before you plan to, and if you do, don't make any rash decisions and contact your normal advisor or provider for guidance first of all. So Katie, what are the most costly retirement stakes that you've seen or that could potentially be made in today's environment?
So probably is looking at urgency. People want to get hold of their money pretty quickly, especially now. So wanting to get their hands on the tax-free cash. So one of the most things I would say is making irrational decisions, not making the right retirement choice for you. So retirement's a really personal decision. So everyone goes into retirement with different sort of things they need to think about, different pension funds they've got in place, their spouse's details, etc. So actually making the right choice for you as an individual is a really, really important decision. And unfortunately, it's a really costly mistake people could make, and is going to impact the lifestyle you have in the future. So with so much freedom and choice and flexibility, it's just really not easy to know where to start or what to choose. So I think we have to be really careful that people make the right retirement decision for themselves. So and that sort of leads on to, well, how do I do that? So another mistake people could make is actually not getting the getting the guidance that's free to them, or taking the financial advice. So if you want to get your hands on your money really quickly, people think, oh, well, I don't need to have someone to tell me what to do. I know that's an option. I'll get my money really quickly. But actually going through the stages and actually having the reassurance that you know what you're doing and it's the right choice for you is really, really important. So that's a really big mistake that people can make, is not getting the right guidance or taking financial advice, especially at the current time when people are really trying to get their hands on the money pretty quickly. I'd also say if you're looking to secure an income, which we've seen sort of more people looking to do over the last couple of months now, by not shopping around, that's a really costly mistake people can make. And it's a really simple exercise, but a lot of people aren't aware of it, might think that the only way they can get their retirement income is with their current pension provider, but that's not the case. Everyone has the right to shop around on the open market, and you really want to make sure you get the best deal out there. So it's no different from anything else. So when you buy anything else, you look for the most competitive deal, and that's exactly what you can do with your retirement income if you're looking for a secure income. And there are 6 providers on the market at the moment, and each one will offer you a different rate at different times. So it's really important you look to the most competitive rate. And as well as shopping around, one other thing that really enhances what you can get from your annuity is your health and lifestyle details. So a lot of people during their working lives will not want to disclose any sort of bad health and lifestyle habits they have or medical details that they have. But now's the time to actually say, you know, I do smoke, I do drink, I suffer from stress, I've got family history of medical conditions. So really make sure you disclose those, because that will also ensure you can get a higher income with your annuity. And finally, I'd probably say a lot of people forget about inflation. So they look at the initial figures and think, oh yeah, well, a single life level annuity is going to give me the best income and the most competitive income. But actually, as the price of goods, they generally rise over time. Actually, so it's really important to inflation-proof your retirement pot as well. So there are 2 different ways if you buy an annuity you can do this. So initially there will be the increase either by 3 or 5%. So it will mean you start off with a lower income, but it'll be protected against inflation in the long run. And also you've got the option to link your income to the retail prices index, so your income will retain its buying power by tracking inflation. So those are probably the most costly mistakes I think people could make.
Lots of things to keep in mind, Katie. Thank you very much. And a question that has come in while you were chatting, relevant to what you were just saying. What was the source of free financial advice for the over 50s?
It's not financial advice. So the Pension Wise, so they're a government body. They give free, impartial information and guidance to you on how you can take your benefits. So if you search the internet for Pension Wise, you'll be able to access their website, and you can have a free telephone conversation with them. But they're really, really good, and it's impartial as well. So they're not going to sort of direct you to any particular company. They'll play a neutral playing field in that respect.
Brilliant. So Pension Wise. Katie, thank you very much indeed. Great to have you with us today. We are now going to move on to our final panelist. Paul, you've been waiting really patiently. Many thanks. So Paul has been dealing with some of the issues recently that many of you have as well, I'm sure. So Paul, how has Hargreaves Lansdown adjusted to, how's Hargreaves Lansdown adjusted the workplace since the start of the pandemic, and what are you doing to maintain productivity?
Good morning. I think first, before I answer that, it would be useful to give just a little bit of context that Hargreaves Lansdown as an organisation is primarily based from Bristol. We have around 1,400 of our 1,700 colleagues attending one of our offices every other day. So because of this, we've built the majority of our people processes around face-to-face delivery, and few of our managers, or indeed our colleagues themselves, are actually overly accustomed to remote working. We also have colleagues who are considered to be providing a key service, key financial service, and they're not allowed to perform those from home. We've also got those who aren't, and so we've essentially created 2 working environments, one office-based and one home-based. The office-based environment has around 300 people, and the home base has around 1,400, which is pretty much the exact opposite dynamic to what we normally have. So our focus throughout this period has been how we keep people motivated, keep them enabled, keep them engaged. And then our view is that if we get those elements right, then we maintain productivity. And so for the office colleagues, this has primarily been around safety. So for example, we've bought the car parking spaces back from all of our home workers, and we've given those to people who used to use public transport to get into work. We've embedded social distancing within the office environment. We've even been out there finding food solutions since all the local cafes and eateries have shut. So this has really been around inspiring the morale and getting these individuals to feel really comfortable that we've got their safety at heart. And to be completely honest, this group have been completely amazing throughout. Now, of course, for those at home, we knew very quickly that outside of what's been a mammoth effort to send out over 1,000 pieces of IT equipment and office furniture all around the Bristol area, we knew very quickly that from a people perspective, this just wasn't going to be home working as normal. And we have lots and lots of colleagues who have essentially become pseudo teachers. And so would now need to be balancing the needs of childcare and schooling alongside their professional work. So this is a group we spend an awful lot of time thinking about. It makes up more than a third of our workforce. And so we make them very comfortable in understanding that we know productivity will be impacted, but actually if we keep on finding good solutions for this group of people, keep them as enabled as possible, we get their motivation as high as it can be, and we get as much productivity as is reasonably practicable. The other thing that we've done an awful lot of is use demographic data and really starting to try and create tailored strategies around all of those different individual people. So whether it's parents or carers or those shielding, those home working, those office working, we really have been clear that actually a one size fits all approach just wasn't going to work. But I think more than anything, the main thing that we've been doing is listening. And so we created an in-office forum, we've created a working from home forum, and these two groups feed into senior managers weekly, and they then feed into the management committee, and we start to take actions based on their feedback. And that's been really insightful, and there's a lot of things that I don't think a management committee would normally think of, which we've actually done over that period. I think that from my perspective, more than anything, keeping people supported, making sure that they understand that they're not alone going through this, which is really easy to feel when you are actually at home on your own, and making sure that they understand that we are supporting them every step of the way has really been key to everything that we've been doing. And again, to my point at the beginning, the better the solutions, the more engaged, the more enabled people are, the more we're seeing our productivity increase over time, broadly back to where it was at the very beginning of the pandemic.
Okay, yeah, and we're seeing a lot of that. I mean, personally, our team is normally out on the road, but we're doing everything virtually, and seems to be going really well. Given how much has changed over the past 8 weeks, how have you actually adapted to the changing employment landscape?
I think it's incredibly interesting, and most days I seem to have a meeting where we discuss how we can actually enable more people to work from home, and also a meeting about how we enable people to come back to the office at the end of the pandemic. So I feel at the moment that we're really sort of balancing the two. There is so much change at the moment, and self-isolation is now something that we use in everyday parlance in HR. But actually, the closest an HR person would have been to seeing something like this before would have been to send a colleague home with something like shingles. And now suddenly we have scores, if not hundreds of people who are at home and not actually permitted to attend the workplace. I think what's been key throughout all of this is that HR would need to adjust its ways of working, especially in the policy space. So we normally get quite a lot of advance warning, sometimes years in advance, if we think about IR35, Solvency II, SMCR. But now suddenly we're getting an evening's notice. And so it was really clear that any sort of previous process relating to how we would change procedure or policy just wouldn't be acceptable. Our colleagues are watching the evening briefing, and then they have an expectation that the next morning that their employer would have adapted to it and would have a stance on it. And so sort of going back and saying that, it's now going through a 4-tier sign-off procedure just wouldn't be enough. And so we've made a lot of adjustments to how we start to adapt to change. But I think if I look beyond policy itself, recruitment, selection, onboarding, inductions, management training, even the negative things like disciplinary processes, we've had to adapt all of those to a virtual environment. And I think what I would say is that with a degree of creativity, we have been able to move almost everything into a virtual space and are pretty much back up and running as we were before. We've been lucky in many respects. We haven't had to use the furlough process. And so I appreciate for a lot of people on the phone or listening in, they'd have been in a position where they've also had to adapt to quite a big legislative change in furloughing as well, which would have only added more complications. I think for us personally, the key to adapting to this change has been around scenario planning. And we still do lots and lots of scenario planning, even at this stage. And that's really given us the ability to adapt to change when it comes. And then having a really clear communication strategy to message this out and to fill any information voids that have been created, especially when you look at government briefings, which are looking to appeal to a very wide demographic. We're then looking to try and tailor that just to speak to our people. I think despite all of the change, the teams, especially those that write policy, have adapted really well. I don't think they ever thought that they would say this, but I think a lot of them are just looking forward to going back and writing IR35 policies.
And looking ahead, we're seeing an easing of lockdown, which I think is being received with varying levels of anxiety. How are you planning to bring colleagues back to work when restrictions are eased? I've actually got vested interest in that one myself.
It's interesting. As I said a moment ago, we do seem to be having meetings most days where we're talking about how we get more people enabled from home, but also at the same time how we bring people back. I mean, lots and lots of companies are talking about different strategies at the moment. I'm sure the people that are listening in can relate to things like red team, blue team methodology, where essentially you have two distinct parts of the workforce that attend the office but don't ever meet with each other. Businesses that can work in shift environments are looking at whether they can have staggered shift times. So again, people don't meet, but we still get everyone into the office, or a lot of people into the office. And then there's other things like neighborhooding, where you break the office into lots of different distinct areas. And then if one person becomes symptomatic, that neighborhood all start working from home again. For us at the moment, I think these are all good options, and there's many options beside. I think what we're doing again is we're trying to keep our options as open as we can. And then we have lots and lots of key considerations, again, around the demographics. And I think ultimately, until schools fully reopen, until nurseries are able to reopen again, a third of our workforce just simply can't come back to the office anyway. We also have to think about isolation. There are a lot of people that are at home at the moment, have been at home on their own for nearly 2 months now. And so we do have a need to prioritise these colleagues to get them back into a social environment, especially those that are finding it really hard from a mental health perspective. Now, I'm sure a lot of the people with children would also say it's incredibly hard to have a house full of children and potentially two people trying to have a professional life as well. So we have all of these considerations to balance. But on the other side, we also have everyone who's shielding. Now, of course, shielding people have already been told when they can come back into an open environment again. So those individuals are not looking to come back. And we have to think about how we keep that group motivated as well. I think, again, back to what I was saying at the beginning in response to this, I think looking for one solution would, in my opinion, be the wrong way to progress. And actually taking response based upon the different needs of your people, then trying to craft this around the needs of your business will definitely be the way that I look to progress.
Okay. Paul, that's an absolutely fascinating insight into what's happening at Hargreaves Lansdown. So we've now got time for some live questions. And actually, Paul, if I can just stick with you just for a second, a couple of questions have come in. Have you had any or many staff requesting to come back into the office?
We have some. We do have some. And it's usually a good place to start a conversation with them to understand why. Now, for some people, it's just because their internet's terrible. And we have bought boosters and we've bought dongles and lots of different things to enable them to fix their problem without the need to come back to the office. We have had some people just because it's been a terrible week with children and it's just been okay, I've had enough, I'm coming back. But again, we just try to understand what's necessitated the question, then try and find a solution that isn't coming back to the office.
Okay, thanks for that. Alistair, I'm going to come back to you now with a question that's come in live. It says, it's auto-enrollment time this month for us. If an employee has reduced their contribution below the minimum level, and in turn we are below the minimum overall contribution level, are we required to increase the employee contribution again as part of the re-enrolment requirement at this current time? Does that make sense?
Okay, yeah. Okay, so if it's re-enrollment, so re-enrollment is a statutory duty, so it requires you as the employer to put any eligible job holder, so that's someone that fits the criteria to be eligible, so put them back in the scheme if they previously opted out or they've ceased active membership themselves. But there is an exception. So if they need to be enrolled, you need to put them in. But there is an exception. So like normal auto enrollment, you can choose whether or not you re-enroll someone who has opted out or ceased active membership of a qualifying scheme at their own request within the last 12 months, or 12 months from your re-enrollment date. So that's the choice that the employer can make. So yes, you do have a duty to enroll them, but you can treat someone who has removed themselves within the last 12 months as an exception if you like.
Okay, and I'm just going to stick with you, Alistair. Another one, given the unprecedented levels of government spending due to COVID-19, do you foresee changes to pension tax relief and or the state pension as a way of making future budget savings?
Okay, gosh. Well, I mean, the level of expenditure is enormous, and given the fact that we've had, virtually every budget for the last, few years has been sort of scarce stories about changes in pensions tax relief. It's going to be there. It's going to be on the agenda, and potentially we could see some tweaking around pensions tax relief. So I don't know if anyone else has got any views on that. Maybe Emma's got some views.
Yeah, Emma, come back to you on that one.
Yeah, I think it's important to put the spending into context. So although the numbers are big, if you compare the overall debt level compared to where we were at the end of the Labour government, it's still quite low. So there is a lot of room for scope. And also what we really need to remember is this recession is not like the last, although things feel painful and we can feel the real personal impact, both from a health point of view, but also in the restrictions that we're having. It was controlled. So the slowdown was engineered by the government rather than something that they've had to respond to. So although there is extreme amounts of money going into the system at the moment, there is every indication that this won't have the same longevity of impact as the last time around because of those control mechanisms. Now, nothing's guaranteed. And of course, as Alan says, the tinkering of pensions is something that governments do regardless of the economic backdrop. But I do think that we should be mindful of putting this into context. The spending is large, but it's not as big as the debt levels we've seen even in recent history. And there's every reason to suggest that we may well see something between that V and that L that we discussed earlier in the recovery.
Brilliant, thanks, Emma. And Katie, can I come back to you with a question? So, could a person crystallise their pension now and take the full 25% lump sum without commencing drawdown and retain the ability to continue their full contributions up to 40,000?
Yes, so if they just take the cash and don't trigger an income, they'll still be entitled to the £40,000 for pension limits. So yeah, as long as they don't take any income, they'll still have that entitlement to the £40,000.
Brilliant. Okay. Another one coming back to you, Alistair, just a quick one. Looking forward, how much cash should an individual try to build in order to weather future challenges?
Gosh, good question. I mean, typically, we would suggest that having 4 to 6 months worth of salary as a reserve, just to sort of keep you, like an emergency pot. But given that these are pretty extraordinary times, I think it's probably worth trying to think more than that. So the economic backdrop is such that we could be in pretty tough positions for an extended period of time. So it would be worthwhile actually trying to save more than that. I think at the moment, it seems that the data suggests that that kind of stress is not quite there, but it could be going forward. So
Okay.
I think employees need to be postured to save.
Yeah. We've got time we've actually had a lot of questions in which we're not going to be able to answer today. And I'll tell you how we're going to deal with that in a minute. But just one more for you, Paul, if you're still with us. What communication methods are working with your employees who are now working from home?
It's a good question. I think it can actually be different depending upon the employee. Again, by having lots of engagement with the forums, we get to know quite quickly what they do like and what they don't like. And so I think our frequency of communication initially, which was broadly email based, it works, but there was probably too much. People got to the point where they couldn't really read it all. And so we've created a SharePoint hub where we now put communications so people can go and find them as and when they need them, rather than it just sort of getting lost in a mass of emails. We also use Zoom an awful lot. They tend to be for smaller communications, more line manager based communication. But again, people start to get a bit of Zoom fatigue. So again, we're trying to flex it as much as humanly possible. Lots and lots of verbal communication. We also, our CEO does videos, other members of the executive team do videos, and then send those out to people. So we even had our CEO interviewed by his daughter a week ago around how he's actually dealing with working from home. So we are trying everything, and then we get really good feedback from the group, and then we remove the things they don't like, and we keep on going with the things that are working.
Brilliant. Thanks, Paul. And another thank you to Emma, Alistair and Katie as well. And talking about communications, before we wrap up, I just wanted to let you know about some free resources that you and your employees can access via Hargreaves Lansdown. We're running a second series of free employee webinars in June, starting with a market update, then helping employees at retirement, and then how to manage your money in a crisis, and finally looking at the gender pension gap. So we'll be sending out links that you can send on to your employees so they can log on to those sessions soon, so look out for those. We're also launching a series of HR financial wellbeing masterclasses from July. They're designed to provide HR managers with hints and tips about how to run effective financial wellbeing programs, as well as how to increase employee engagement with pensions. There's also lots of videos on the YouTube channel on financial wellbeing. So if you're interested in a particular topic, let us know and we will send over a link. So before we wrap up, in fact, we'd love to hear from you. In fact, straight after the webinar, you'll receive a feedback survey. If you could take a couple of minutes to complete it, then we'll know what you've liked today and listen to some ideas for webinars in the future. And as I said, if you have a question that hasn't been answered, let us know in the free text box on the survey. Or if you'd like to get in touch with us, give us a call, pop us over an email, visit our website, look at the LinkedIn page. Just a big thank you to everybody for joining today. Stay safe. Have a great day. Thank you.